Now that we've kind of rambled a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
we should say again, hey, thanks for checking out the recap. We're about to talk about the episode. And if you want to see the whole video, click the link below. See, now people are like, okay, yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yes.
So, all
Okay. So
right, let's
yeah,
do this thing.
we'll jump in. Episode 4 of Exandria Unlimited, By the Road. All right. So we start off, the end of last episode had our whole party just riding away in the cart after having just bested Posca, and they are now on their way to the ruins of Conera. I think that's how you say it, Quinceanera.
Mhm.
And since our cart driver was unfortunately maybe killed last episode, the party is now in control of this cart, and so they're just going to take it the whole way now, where previously they were just taking it to the edge of the city. But anyway, so we're in our cart on the way, and the episode hilariously just starts with Fern trying to control the cart and unfortunately rolling a natural 1 on her animal handling check, and the cart just literally comes to a stop. And Dariax is like, all right, I'll help here. And he uses Thaumaturgy to cast Thunderclap and just scare the bejesus out of the horses, which it does. And in this happening, Fern actually falls off the cart from not being able to hold on. And basically, we just have this quick scene of just some hijinks of everyone trying to fix this problem, but not being able to. Like Dorian tries to cast Levitate on Fern and like drag her along with the cart, but unfortunately, Levitate does not like tether you to the person. So all he does is lift her up, and she's just where she was, but now floating. Um, so it's a bunch of chaos, and finally somebody's like, just pull on the reins. And so Dariax tries that, but also fails. And ultimately, we just have Aurum leap into action, just kind of like nimbly jumps onto the horse, covers its eyes, and that horse is able to calm down, slow down. But the other one, unfortunately, is not. So the cart jeers off the path and eventually comes to a stop. And everybody gets back together, and they're like, okay, what are we doing? And they realize that the Gilmore cart they have is actually leaving a trail of glitter behind them, and so like, okay, we're like running from a bunch of people. This maybe isn't the best trail to be leaving behind. They do come to realize though that if you wait long enough, the glitter will disappear, but they're not one to take any chances. And so the cart, which they have deemed the glitter shitter, they come up with a diaper for it, and Dorian uses his cape to kind of capture the glitter so that they're leaving absolutely no trail. So after all these hijinks, they get back on and they get back on the road. And here we're hit with a bit of a time jump. And Abria says they basically are traveling for a few weeks, and it's pretty uneventful. And the cast in this moment, actually, they don't really RP anything for this time. It's just boom, 2 week time jump or whatever. And we're just that is ended with a wisdom saving throw from Fern. And I guess we don't know if she fails or succeeded, but she realizes that all of a sudden she remembers this road. It's the same road that she traveled on when she first came to Amon after leaving the
Mhm.
Feywild. And so she just starts feeling like this kind of nostalgia or this memory about this area. And suddenly she feels like pulled towards something like deep in the woods. And so, since she's the one in control, she actually starts steering the cart off the road and kind of into the woods. And Aurum is up there with her, and he kind of notices they're getting off track, but they're still going in the general direction they need to be. So he doesn't really say anything because they're still a couple weeks travel away from where they're going ultimately. But Dorian does ask. He's like, "Hey, what? Why are we pulling off the road? What are we doing?"
Right.
And Fern says that she thinks it's safer to not be on the road, be more inconspicuous, and also that she needs to check something. And she asks everyone else, like, "Hey, does anybody else feel like pulled to something over here, like I do?" And Orem and Dariax both also do feel something. Like they said, like something right behind their navel was pulling them in that same direction. And Dariax launches into a little spiel about how, you got to trust the feeling in your gut. And, sometimes that's just like the truest thing you can do is just follow that. And so, because of that, they're like, okay, you know what? We're going to check this out. So they keep getting further and further off the road, deeper and deeper into the woods. And bugs start getting all over Opal, and she is very not about it. But Fern lets her borrow Mister, and he basically becomes her personal exterminator, sitting on her shoulder and eating the bugs and everything. Um, So during this time, we kind of get a little bit of RP with the party, talking about random stuff, and they actually start pressing Dorian for information, being like, "How come you haven't told us anything about yourself?" And
Right.
he's like, you know what? I'm from a small town, just like you guys are." And they're like, "Oh yeah, well, what town?" And he can't come up with anything. He's like,
Yeah. It's like, shoot, what's the name? What's
yeah.
the name?
And so
Awkward silence.
exactly. And so they're like, okay, like you don't have to tell us if you don't want to. And he says, maybe in time he'll feel more comfortable, but he'd rather not reveal too much right now. But he does let them know that he had a happy childhood and that he actually does have a brother and that he's just happy to be where he is now. And,
Right.
he'll hopefully share more later. And Dariax basically comforts him. Is like, hey, we all have pasts we're not proud of, so don't worry about it. So then Fern actually makes another wisdom saving throw and presumably fails again, but we're not told. And Aurum notices her entire appearance begin to change. Her eyes go from normal to become like goat-like and more feral. And he's like, "Hey, what's happening to you?" And she does not know this. She wasn't aware, I don't think, but also is not familiar with this change in her. So like I said, they just keep traveling, following this pull that Fern is feeling, and eventually they reach a part of the woods that's like too thick to travel by cart. So Fern gets out and she's like, "Hey, I gotta see what's going on with me. What's going on here? Like, I'm gonna keep going. Y'all do what you want." And as that's happening, there's a great moment between Dorian and Dariax in the back of the cart. And Dariax is basically like, "You know what? I think I figured you out, Dorian. You're a carnival folk." And Dorian kind of messes with him and is like, "You know what? You're exactly right. But don't tell anyone because this is just our little secret." And he actually says that his family was from like this really famous trapeze artist and juggler, and that his father was a famous juggler and performed for a king. And that the king loved it so much, he wanted to keep Dorian's father there to like always perform for him. But Dorian's dad wasn't about that, and so he left. And because this upset the king, he put a contract out on Dorian's father's life. So that's why Dorian's like, "You can't tell anyone, because if anyone to find us out about me, it would all be over." And so Darius is like, "Okay, yeah, I won't tell anybody." Um, so then everyone gets out of the cart and they all decide, it's better if we stick together. So we're all going to roll together. And they start making their way on foot into the woods. And they ultimately come to this open glade. And there is this like mysterious gate just sitting there. And if my friend, would you like to take over from here?
Yeah. Which great job, by the way. I love, by the way, when DRX is like, "I think you're from the carnival," and he's like, "How did you know?"
Yes.
But yeah, so they get to this spot, and this was a really cool scene, only because it's a throwback to Fern peeling back that false memory and realizing that she had traveled through a gate to eventually make it to Iman. And she recognizes this gate and realizes, oh, this is actually where I came through from the Feywild. And this is like a really interesting place, by the way, this glade that they're in, because things are very much unnatural.
Right.
It's in the spot where there aren't really any insects or creatures around. There's just the flora. But like the motion, I think they might even use the phrase of like, it was kind of like, it almost felt like the space was almost kind of shimmering.
Yeah.
Some things were very fresh and other things were starting to decompose. In fact, Dariax checks his rations and notices that his bread or whatever he had on him was actually already molding, even though it should have lasted for much longer. Opal, who's hating all of the the nature adventure already, she sneezes and her spittle, like she spews it out and then it just kind of lingers in the air. And Abria even mentions that the sun and the moon are both up in the sky. So it's a very weird place. It's a very strange place. But Fern is totally locked in on this gate and this temptation, this pull, whatever this is. She basically says, "Hey, what if we just stepped in for a second? We just went through for a minute and just said hey to everybody, said hey to the fam." Specifically, she says, "You could meet my grandmother." And I think maybe it's Orem or someone who's even kind of encouraging her to, yeah, maybe you should go through. Do you want to go home? And Fern's kind of like, well, and it's interesting this kind of duality that's happening, because on one hand she's feeling the temptation, she's feeling the pull, but on the other hand she mentions how, well, I was sitting here for a reason and I don't quite know if my job is done.
Right.
So they talk about it, and this temptation continues to fester until finally she's like, maybe I will just step in just for a second. And so she walks up to the gate, and I can't remember if they said it was a reflection of what she saw, or maybe it was just clear, like she could see what was behind it as being actually already there, but yet you could tell there was like the barrier of the gate. Regardless, she slowly puts her hand through, and she immediately begins to smell this intense burning smell, and it kind of freaks her out. And so she pulls her hand back, but this reflection of her hand actually like follows her back out of the gate. And this is such a cool, well-described scene.
Yeah.
The hand comes through, and then from that also comes out the rest of a body. And Fern steps back as this creature basically steps through the gate and stands before her. And it's someone who looks very similar to her. Ashley Johnson is kind of trying to figure out, like, who is this person? And Abria mentions, like, you definitely recognize her. And Fern's like, is this my mother? And this creature says, which, by the way, she looks very similar to Fern. She's darker. She has harder angles. Abria even mentions that she moves in a way that's very unnatural and strange. Her clothes, it's the same clothes, but they're covered in soot. She has these big, bright fangs. And she's also wearing something, a dark circlet on her head, which at this moment I was like, no way. And she says to Fern, it's time to come home. So like I mentioned, Fern's trying to figure out, who is this person? What's, like, who am I looking at? And she says, like, is this my mother? And that's when we realize that this is in fact Dark Fern, as we're calling her. And she says, no, I'm you. Time is different here. And I'm what you should be. It's almost like what you're destined to become. Like, I am you.
Yeah.
And what you will be if you decide to come with me and step through. And Fern's kind of thrown by this. She's like, you definitely don't look like me, in the sense of, like, you're a lot rough around the edges. And so she asks, well, what happened to you? And she says, well, I found my power. And she actually notices the crown on her head, and she says, did you put on the circlet? And Fern just smiles, and meanwhile Dirax is like, we still have our circlet, so what's going on here? And Dark Fern even asks, like, do you want it? Do you want the crown? And Fern, interestingly enough, remember, she's neutral, her alignment's neutral. She says, yes, I do want it. But so she asked for like a demonstration of this power, and Dark Fern actually creates this wildfire around the gate that begins to spread. We also know that Mister is really intensely caught up in what's happening here. And we also see behind Dark Fern on these shadows behind the portal that almost seem like they're waiting to come through. And Fern asks if this is Sweet Pea, Bumpers, and Peepers, who's a bear, a crocodile, and a rabbit that she knows. Abria starts to describe something happening from one of the characters' perspectives, and it's kind of confusing. You're like, well, who's she talking about right now? She mentions a person's stomach churning, and a voice speaking from the dark. It's Abria describes, these are people that you see that they're in danger, you recognize them. And then we actually get a new character. That's who she's describing, someone entirely new to the party who's kind of lingering on the side. And this is fy'ra, a level 4 monk, which I'm not sure if she's actually level 4.
Yeah,
a level 4 monk who's played by Anjali Bhimani. She has a hair of fire. She has a long staff, and she basically tells Dark Fern, hey, step back from us, and we begin to roll initiative. So we have this really awesome combat scene. Fern asks, did you find Mama and Papa? And Dark Fern's like, she keeps goading her to come with her. And actually, Dark Fern mentions that basically throws grandma under the bus and says that she lied to us. All of the letters came from her, not from our parents, which to me implied that I guess at some point Fern was receiving letters from her parents, and Dark Fern's basically saying, no, that was a lie. It was from our grandma. But anyway, the coolest part before this fight is when Orym steps in front of Fern, and so does fy'ra as to sort of protect Fern. And Dark Fern kind of laughs at their poor show of competition and says, that's the funny thing about time. I've killed you all already. But you're like, wait, what? What is that? So Dark Fern has her own version of Mister, also kind of twisted. She also summons a bunch of scorpions that are made out of burning driftwood. We have the battle happen. Opal tries to poison spray one of the scorpions, and she doesn't have her magic. And we see Ted basically saying, hey, just apologize. And she's like, no, I won't. And like even everyone else is being like, I don't know what's going on, but please get over yourself, apologize. And part of me kind of thought this was the players too being like, okay, but really, like we need your help here. But she does have some cool flavor where she uses her whip, she uses her knives. We even have Dorian inspired Dariax and basically saying, now's your chance, kill Mister. And Dariax is like, yes, finally. But so they fight with the scorpions, they fight with Dark Fern. And what's interesting is Dark Fern actually looks at fy'ra and says, I've never killed you before. This is going to be fun. Which kind of makes me wonder, and we'll get into this later, but like the time, like her mentioning that we've done this before,
what's going on?
Maybe wonder if fy'ra is like the changing factor, the thing that isn't normally there. I don't know. We'll talk about it. But so the two Misters fight each other. Our Mister gets pretty rough, and Dariax, you can tell he's trying to do like a really cool like attack, and he's like, oh, dang it. And he reaches out and heals Mister. And then he's like, we're never going to talk about this again. And some Redditors were joking that maybe Mister kind of like on his deathbed, like gave him the poop hand. Because Mister's actually been throwing like this hot poop at Dark Fern as well. In the fight, everyone's basically battling. They're actually rolling incredibly well. Orym has an insane roll where he gets a natural 20 crit on Dark Fern. He acts it out really well. And actually, Fern has this cool moment where she tries to use Stonky's ring to pull the circlet off of Dark Fern's head.
Yeah.
And Abria said something like, you're going to have to roll really well. I think she rolled a 17. It seemed like, I think she even told her you need to roll an 18. And she rolled, I think, a 17. And it was kind of like, what could happen here?
Yeah.
But so she almost pulls it off, and Dark Fern kind of grabs it and pulls it back to her own head. fy'ra gets the final blow, hits her staff into Dark Fern's throat, and then kind of pushes through, and the body just crumbles away. And this is actually this is the turn before Dark Fern was about to bring through the portal a big, dark, shadowy creature, which might have been really bad, especially considering at this point Opal has been knocked unconscious. We know in D&D rules it's unconscious. They also say a couple of times you died, we think you died, so we'll have to talk about exactly what was happening there. But as they finish off the enemies, some people show up at the edge of the glade and help finish off the last scorpion, and an elven woman in a purple robe who seems to be the leader basically says, what have you done? And that's where the episode goes to a break. I planned on that being very quick. That actually ended up being very long. So
that's Critical Role, baby.
Yeah. All right, you take it from there. What happens after the break?
Yeah, so when we come back from the break, we're given this moment with Fern. She actually makes an Arcana check and rolls really high. And Abria says that she looks through the gate, and although the shadows are like dissipating away, like the magical energy of it is, she says that she noticed a figure stands like as a sentinel in like the back of Fern's mind. And Fern actually recalls this figure, and we're given this name of the unforgiving High War Queen of the Burning Veil, matriarch of the Sealy Court. And what? And she says that as the gate fades, so does this like recollection Fern has. So not sure if Fern like actually remembers that she remembers that or not. We'll talk about it later. But crazy moment. And so after we get that little quick tidbit, we then cut to Opal, who again is unconscious. And so this is kind of taking place in like the theater of Opal's mind. She's in like a dark place, and all of a sudden she finds herself face to face with Ted. And the two basically get into kind of this emotional argument, and it
Intense.
actually was like Abria and Amy kind of busted out the acting chops. They like really killed this moment
Mhm.
in a good way, not a bad way. And basically Opal is mad at Ted because Ted, she couldn't use her magic when she needed to, and Ted's mad at Opal for like not just being able to say sorry and like being so stubborn to the point where like she might literally die because of it. And
Mhm.
basically it's just this big sibling, type of argument where Opal kind of resents Ted for always like clinging on to her and being like, I'm sorry that like I was the star of the show and you always were the second fiddle. And
Mhm.
Ted's like, I never had a problem with that. I just, I was happy just to give everything away to protect you. And Opal's like, I never asked you to do that. And like I said, basically normal sibling kind of fight, but Abria tells Amy that like Opal, you realize that like she actually is like deeply sobbing and feels like this true pain in her chest, referring to Ted. And so they start kind of to reconcile a little bit, and she's like, you make it out of this, you'll have your powers back, and just please protect yourself. And they basically just cry and say that they love each other. And um then we kind of snap back as to back in the real world. And um Dariax is finishing off the evil mister, doing like some cool theatrics with his killing blow. And fy'ra is like, hey, is somebody gonna heal Opal? Like, if Mr. Dwarf, isn't this your job? Like, why aren't you taking care of this? And he's like, I was doing it. I was doing it. And so while they're kind of having that little spat, Fern just goes over and heals Opal. And that's kind of this all happening in like the same moment. And so Opal comes to from her unconscious
Mhm.
conversation with Ted. And with Ted's final words being, don't you fucking die.
Mhm.
And so Opal comes back and is like, what happened? And the party explains to her that, she got knocked out. I think some of them even say that she died, but again, you think you mentioned this. We'll talk about it later. But she's like, yeah, and you were out. And so Opal then realizes that Ted was just telling her the truth, that she almost just died. And so she casts Eldritch Blast on a nearby stump to test and see if she has her magic, and she indeed does. Um, and then Abria has everyone in this moment call for a wisdom save, and Orem, Fern, and Opal all roll high enough that she says they feel a very strong connection with fy'ra. That they didn't know her name or anything, but they have an intense familiarity with her. Like something is there. Um, so then, like Blake mentioned a second ago, we also have these other new people that have shown up, and so Orem and fy'ra both get between everyone else in the party and these new mysterious elves. And um, the leader basically walks up and introduces herself as Marata Neselor. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. And she's from Singorn. She explains that like this area is their woods, and they're patrolling it, making sure what's going on here is on on the level. And they're basically like, what is happening here? Like, what are you guys doing? What have you done to these woods? And they mentioned that they've never seen anything like this, like the gate and like the Fey energy and like the weird things that are happening here. And more elves behind her start fanning out, and the party notices that they've got these like big crystal like rod looking things, and they're like shoving them in the ground in intervals like around this space. And they're asking like, what are those for? And they're like, this is to clean up this magical mess that you've made here. um fy'ra then asks that, where are you guys from? How far away is this Singorn place? Could we perhaps rest there for the night and rest? And they find out that it's actually 3 or 4 days away, so they're like, okay, we're not going to do that. And then the party tells fy'ra about the glitter shitter, and she's like, all right, we'll go there. And So they're gonna make their leave there, but before they do, Fern asks Murata like what they've seen around here and what's going on, and that's when Murata says, I've never seen this before, which is very strange because like if these are their woods and they're familiar with them, you'd think they'd know about this like Fey gate.
Mhm.
But she's like, "Yep, don't know what's going on here, never seen this," and kind of unsettled by it. And then we get this moment while these conversations are taking place that Opal um, gets her mind invaded by Murata, who cast detect thoughts on her, and Abria has Amy say, "Hey, what are you thinking about right now?" And Amy reveals that she was thinking about that conversation with Ted and her relationship with her sister, and then she feels this other presence in her mind, kind of like exploring those memories without her permission, and feels really like invaded and like betrayed, and she realizes that it was Murata poking around in there, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And like Murata's like, "I wanted to find some stuff out," and she basically gets really
Yeah.
upset that like she had no consent for such a thing, and so tempers start to flare. But fy'ra again kind of gets in between them as like, we're gonna be making our leave now, and so they do, but the one last thing that happens is Fern is like, "Hey, if you guys happen to go in that gate or, see some stuff around here and you see my grandmother, please tell her hello from me." And it kind of Murata's kind of caught off guard by like the what's the word? Like kindness, or like she didn't expect that from her. So
She
she was
kind of
kind of,
feels it's like she empathizes a little bit with it.
yeah,
She's like,
yeah.
no, okay, yeah.
Like, okay. And he's like, "All right, I will tell her that, and if we see her." And so then they're making their leave, and we get this kind of revelation about fy'ra in this moment that she is able to like close her eyes, and she describes like closing her eyes and looking up at her eyelids, and this is like her way of communicating with something. Like maybe it's her god, maybe, I mean, who
Mhm.
knows? We're not told anything, but she does that to communicate with some higher power or some other power, and she she says that, or it's revealed to her that one of this group has put a drop of thought, like ink spreading in water, into the rest of the group.
Mm.
So even though they're not going to go to Singorn, where those elves are from, this isn't over yet, which very cryptic, and I'm sure we'll dive
Mhm.
into it later. But so then the party make their leave. They head back to the glitter shitter, as it were. Um, and on this walk, we have a few moments here. Orem is kind of concerned about Fern and this dark circlet, since everything he just saw with the dark version of Fern, and he kind of like gets near her and is like, concentrating. Like you can see he's like in deep thought about like looking at the circlet, looking back to Fern. And Fern kind of notices that she's doing this, and they kind of have a moment where she like places her hand on his cheek, and as no words are spoken, I don't think, but definitely some vibes.
Mhm.
And
Ship it.
exactly. And meanwhile, Opal too is eyeing the circlet and says she's considering her options, whatever that means. And Dorian notices her kind of staring at this, and he kind of walks over and tries to connect with her. And she's still kind of mad that he hasn't revealed anything about his past, and so she's not really trying to, have him come get up in her business. But he just says, "I could tell from the way you were arguing during the fight, like." He's like, "I know that fight. That's a sibling fight." And he's like, "I have a brother. I understand. So if you ever want to talk
Mhm.
about it, I'm here for you." And she's like, "Okay." Um, so they make the long walk that they joke about, but they make the long walk back, and fy'ra finally formally introduces herself. She says she's this protector of sorts, and that they don't know her, but she knows them, but she doesn't know how she knows them or why she knows them. But hopefully her actions in that battle have spoken louder than any words could, and she's proved that she's trustworthy, that she's here to help. And Orem rolls an insight check on this, and he rolls really well, and he gleans that she's being completely sincere and earnest in what she does and doesn't know. um so they're like, "Okay, you know what, she can come with us." And Darius lets her know what they're doing, that they're traveling to these ruins of Conira. And when fy'ra finds that out, she laughs and she says, "So this is why we journey together. And they just jump up all in the wagon and set off. So seemingly in that moment, she maybe had like a clicking, like some sort of understanding there. So back in the wagon, back on the road to Byroden. We get about another week and a half of travel, and they finally arrive. And in the back of the wagon, Dorian's showing how Dariax had to juggle, still kind of going in on his carny folk thing. And they make it to the gates, and Opal's like, "Hey, let us in." And they're like, "Opal who?" And it basically just teasing her, and we basically get the idea that, okay, Byroden is a small enough town where like everyone knows everyone. And Opal's embarrassed to be coming back because she hasn't like accomplished what she wants to accomplish yet. She's returning home without her glory yet, as it were. So they're ribbing her, but they come in, and basically as soon as they're in the gates, this lady runs up to the cart, presumably having heard the fact that Opal's name was just mentioned, and she was like, Opal, are you in there? And we come to find out that this is Ruby Lee Beckford, wife of the War Ringer and head of the festivities. And festivities there are, because as we pull into the city, you can see that there's like this big fair and like tents and like lots of activity happening. And Opal basically lets them know, like, oh yeah, this is the Gem of Byroden pageant that we have every year. It's basically just a big fair, and there's a pageant and there's a lot going on. And so Ruby runs up and she's like, oh my gosh, are you gonna be competing today? And basically is just so excited to see her, and she's like, oh my gosh, you're here. When is Ted coming back? And Opal's like, wait, Ted's not here? And Ruby reveals that, oh yeah, she's not here. She left shortly after you did. Everyone around here just assumed that, you guys met up at some point in Amon or something. And so Opal's like, oh, okay, interesting. I thought she was here. So then Ruby's telling everybody that, welcome to the festival, but she takes a keen notice of Orem, and she's like, oh my gosh, you are way too skinny. Come with me. And she just starts trying to feed him food, and there's like a big pie festival happening at the fair, and he's like, I've never had pie. And so everyone's like, what? And so all these vendors are trying to give him little slices of pie to try and get his reaction on them, and it's just a great segment. And he like starts having the sweats and just is so full, and basically becomes
High
like
sweats.
it becomes like a mini celebrity amongst the food vendors.
Yeah.
And but while that's happening, meanwhile, Opal continues to explain like the pageant to everybody else, and Dorian's like, oh yeah, we had stuff like this where I was from too. And fy'ra once again does her eye communication thing and asks, like, do we have time for this? And the voice or whatever in her head, lets her know that, this is the last bit of comfort you guys will have before the road ahead. So like, enjoy it, basically. And so fy'ra's like, opens her eyes and looks at Opal and is like, okay, like, tell us more, lead the way. And if you'd like to take it from there, just go up on the pageant, baby.
Yeah, it was very ominous, by the way, of fy'ra being like, should we really be doing this? And just that strong sense of it. This is literally the last sort of moment of happiness you're going to have. I was very ominous. So
yeah, it was.
But yeah, so then after this, they have the pageant, and they're informed that the pageant's basically 3 parts. It's the interview, the talent show, and evening wear. And Opal, Fern, Dorian, and Dariax all decide, hey, we're going to enter into the pageant. And we'll mention this later, but for the talent show portion, they do decide, well, we don't want to compete with Opal, so we'll just perform with her for that section, even though like some of the one of the employees of the pageant is kind of like Orem aside, Bria actually has characters for them to play, just so that they're still part of the event. Liam gets to be the absolute best person in Exandria, Cinna Brightbow, and Jali is going to be Lyle Vester, who is well, I'll just describe both of them real quick. So Cinna is this blonde dwarven woman who runs a jewelry shop. Her family has lived there for 100 years, and she actually won this competition about 15 years earlier. Lyle Vester seems to be some kind of, I got the sense of like a high school rival.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like they really hate each other. They've competed against each other before in the past. And she's really the Gary Oak to our I can't think of the main character.
Ash Ketchum.
Ash Ketchum. Yeah,
Great
he's sort of
ref.
yeah, it's they are the dueling people in this pageant.
Yeah.
So for the interview portion, Cinna is brought up and she's asked, or Ruby asked in this great Southern accent. She's like, if you were a gym, what kind of gym would you be? And Cinna, who's being played by Liam O'Brien, who is so freaking good in this section, but says I would be it has this awesome Irish accent.
Yeah.
Says I would be an emerald green like the city, and the crowd just like, oh yeah, we love you. Dariax goes up and is basically asked, and by the way, he decides he wants to change his clothes using his cloak, but he's not sure what to wear going out for this section. So he actually copies exactly what Dorian's wearing. And it's this really awesome, great outfit. And everyone actually loves it. Even though it's not the evening wear section, they're like, this guy looks good. And people are so appreciative of like how good he looks that like Dorian sort of on the side, like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, that is my outfit.
Yeah. Great.
But separate from that, Dariax is asked the same question. If you were a gym, what kind would you be? And, being our low intelligence, low wisdom character, Dariax misunderstands and says that he would be peach jam. The crowd is kind of like, it's definitely miscongeniality vibes. But so they're all like, yeah, we love food. And so they're all like, yeah, okay, peach jam.
Let's get it.
So the crowd really likes it, although Ruby's kind of like, I don't know about that. Next up is Opal, who's wearing this really beautiful outfit, asked the same question. And she says that she would be a ruby because they're beautiful and they're the color of the heart. And she's obviously just trying to appease or appeal to Ruby herself, who seems to be kind of the main judge of this pageant.
Yeah.
Dorian is next, and he's really upset about Dariax taking his outfit. So he grabs the cloak from him and decides he's going to make his own outfit. But as he's putting it on, he's looking at Dariax, and he actually ends up sort of unwittingly copying Dariax's clothes for himself. And it's all the wrong sizes. It like doesn't fit at all. And so he comes out and everyone's kind of like, are you good? Like, do you need to, change or anything? But so, and then it totally flubs this section. He looks bad. He gets asked the same question and he says, I'd be a diamond because it's hard to like me. I couldn't even get that out without laughing. He says, it's hard like me. And then everyone's kind of like, like what? And then he's like, oh, I mean, an opal. An opal is my favorite gem. After the section, we see Lyle Vester really rip on Opal. She's like, oh, it's so good to see you.
Yeah.
And, kind of gives her a hard time for leaving. And then when she goes up on stage, she gets asked a different question and says, what does Byroden mean to you? And she starts talking about how it's like the best place in the world. And you can tell she's leading up to saying, but most of all, it's home.
Yeah.
With like this really great line. Well, Dariax actually uses thaumaturgy to make it sound like she's farting through the whole speech. And Ruby and the crowd are kind of like, Ruby especially is like, yep, I get it. We're dairy folk. We get it. Just get yourself taken care of, maybe. No big deal. And Opal actually gives Dariax a really big kiss for this, just out of appreciation for it. And then Fern comes up and she's asked, what's your favorite flower? And she says an oleander because it has so many uses. It's pretty, it smells good, and it can kill someone. Ruby's like, yep, I get it. I've been married more than once. Which props to Abria for just the back and forth.
Yeah.
So they have that section. Next up is the talent portion. And again, they all decide, you know what, let's help Opal with her section. Mm-hmm. Which the person who they're talking to is like someone that Opal knew from high school who's like backstage, is kind of like, okay, that's not really quite what we do, but sure, that's fine. So first we have Lyle Vester comes up. She's on a pony. She's prancing around. Dariax once again uses his magic. I guess he used like mage hand to basically grab the horse's testicles. And the horse bucks and throws Lyle off, but she lands gracefully and the crowd goes crazy. And again, Opal's like, thank you, Dariax. Cinna's up and she's wearing this green mask and a cape. She brings up this big block of ice and she's like looking for an assistant. She's like, look, my assistant. And Orem, who's like having the pie sweats, is kind of like, me? Brings up Orem, and it's such a great scene because now Liam is acting himself, engaging with himself.
Yeah.
But it's like, this is my assistant, and brings up Orem and ties him to the block of ice and turns to the crowd and says, will the halfling live or will he die? And everyone's kind of like, wait, what? And fy'ra in the crowd is actually like trying to push her way through to make sure that he is safe and okay. So Cinna throws the first axe and it just barely misses his head by a couple of centimeters. And everyone's kind of like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And before we while everything's crazy and intense and it's like, what do we even do? Cinna, Liam O'Brien just interrupts everyone talking and says, let's have another go, and throws a second axe. And this one also, let me catch the details here because I can't remember. Each one beat his AC and they land perfectly right above his head, right between his legs. And then the final one, which was a natural 20, lands right next to his neck. All while fy'ra is trying to get up and make sure he's okay. Crowd is going nuts. Cinna stage dives to the crowd and gets surfed away, basically. So Opal and the crew are next. They have this performance. Opal is playing a really soft, beautiful song, and Abria lets her know that like the crowds are really not vibing with it because they had just this incredible, intense moment with Cinna, and now it's come down really far. Yeah. What ends up happening is she's having this heartfelt moment. She's saying, I missed you all. I'm so glad to be home. The performance is really, it's a low roll moment anyway. And so the rest of the team basically come out and hype it up. And, Fern has her pan flute. Dariax is slamming a spear on the ground to the tune of the beat and just trying to get like the crowd going. Yeah. And Opal makes her final performance check and gets a dirty 20. So Lyle's disappointed, and Opal basically being like, you cheated. Basically says, the world's changed you. Ted said this would happen before she left. So we're getting more insight into Ted. And Dariax basically stands up for her and says, yeah, if you don't have any friends, it is better to perform solo. And then basically makes another Lyle fart sound as she's walking away. Lastly, we have the evening wear portion where they're supposed to wear their best outfits. And last year's winner comes out on stage. It's this person named Olivancer Fields. He's wearing this long cape, black armor, and pauldrons. And Opal's like, yeah, we dated in high school. Dariax is going to go out first, but he realizes, oh, crap, I already used my awesome outfit originally when I stole Dorian's outfit. And so he decides to basically look like a Tin Man, which he uses the cloak to make himself look like he's made out of tin. He comes out. And everyone's kind of like, what? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah, this is. And so they're kind of just like, okay. Which Opal, feeling bad for him, comes out, tries to hype it up. And the crowd's like, okay, yeah, that was okay. Dorian is next. And he decides to wear his original outfit that Dariax has stolen. And he takes off his clothes. And he basically, the bottom line, dude is like jacked. Opal's like, you're hot. Yeah. Like, he looks really good. And he struts out, and he also wears his boots, that are, he says they're winged boots, which I thought was really interesting. And he uses the boots to levitate and basically walk above the stage on the air. The crowd just goes nuts for it. He's actually kind of embarrassed by how much affection is being shown his way. Yeah. And then Lyle is next. She comes out in this beautiful ball gown. She has these fireflies that are in the folds that are flying up as she's spinning and dancing. And actually, Dariax himself is so like, oh, dang, you look good, that he like forgets to mess with her this time. Opal comes out with the big dress with lots of tulle, and it has an armored chest plate. fy'ra casts this orange glow on her as she's walking around. The crowd loves it. She looks beautiful. And then Cinna comes up next, comes out on the stage swinging on a rope, does a flip off the rope. She's wearing a green dress. And she's like, I don't even care if I win. I just love you all so much. And again, everyone just goes nuts for this. And then Fern comes out in a similar outfit from before, but she's like ripped off parts of it to make herself look, I guess, more sexier.
Yeah.
And even does like primal savagery with like her claws and her fangs. And so that is basically the pageant. So the results are tallied. Everyone comes back up on stage. Cinna gets revealed to basically get third place. It's a huge crime.
Stop the steal.
Yeah. Lyle is given what we realize is basically the first, the actual runner-up. And it's the title is called the Gem of Our Hearts. And it's basically the person who takes over the Gem of Byroden role if the winner can't for some reason. And then the winner is crowned, and it turns out to be Opal. And she says how much she loves the town and accepts the crown. And she actually goes up to her room into sees Ted's bed and basically sets the crown on Ted's bed and walks out. And the crowd, the party ends up, drinking and enjoying the rest of the night. Meanwhile, Orem kind of gets away to a quiet place and begins practicing his strikes, basically. And he remembers basically who he is in this moment. And in this moment, the backdrop's lit up, and these are mentioned earlier in the episode when they first come into the town. But these statues of Vex and Vax from what's the name? Almost said, what's the name of the band?
Vox Machina.
Vox Machina. Yeah. So, and then there is a post-credit scene, and Abria basically says Ted looks down into the darkness around her, within her. She feels so close to home, though she can't touch it. She feels alone despite her existence within and beside Opal. She feels the seed of potential, of purpose. The seed begins to grow. And that is episode 4 of Exandria Unlimited.
Ooh,